That was crazy.
I was watching that draft. I actually had a few friends who have moved on to NHL staffer jobs, and they actually were just cutting their teeth in the draft analytics sphere. So you can take a pretty easy guess at who I'm talking about here. But I swear, when the Zach Senyshyn pick came through, I think that all of us pretty much leapt out of our seats and we're just howling, And of course, I feel terrible now. I've just sewered this poor kid. I actually really like Zach Senyshyn. I think that he's got a ton of speed. And you know what? If he was a, I don't know, second round pick, perhaps, maybe even a mid third, Bruins fans could feel a lot better about that one. The same goes for Jakub Zaboral. I mean, that wasn't as large of a reach, but it sure does look rough when you compare it to the success of perhaps a Kyle Connor, perhaps a Matt Barzal, perhaps a Brock Besser, Thomas Chabot. If I go on any longer, we're going to lose every single Bruins fan that we have, though. And we don't want to do that. So rest assured that we're going to give you some hope that this is the year. They don't have a first, but this is the year that they might buck the trend with a fantastic first pick in the second round.
Well, also don't forget that the New Jersey Devils also have 3 picks in this year's first round. So there's a lot going on and a lot of opportunity, I think, for teams to take a chance on a player. So I think that's what adds interest. And you know what else I think adds interest to? Knowing that certain GMs, right off the top of my head, in particular is Steve Yzerman, it doesn't matter where he's picking, the guy he wants is going to be the guy that he gets, which is why I think having Detroit at 4 sandwiched with Ottawa, having 2 picks in 3 and 5 really presents a lot of opportunity there for some wild cards to really change up the draft order because they can.
I think that's fair. You know, I think the team that's put the most pressure on themselves is Ottawa, only because Pierre Dorion came out and said, you know, that first pick we make, that pick's going to play in the NHL. And it's like, okay, but now you've messed up what possibly could be like an ultimate plan where, hey, if you wanted to go Drysdale with that first pick, then you can get a really great one with your next pick, the 5th pick. But now, you know, Drysdale's not going to play in the NHL right away. So now is that going to stop Ottawa from drafting him because he made that promise? Like, that's something where I feel like Dorion has cornered himself a little bit and narrowed down. And look, he's going to, I'm just saying, he's not going to do that, but he's limited himself a little bit.
Russ, are you seeing my face right then?
I'm seeing your face.
Okay, because here's the thing. He knows where he's picking. He knows who he's got. You know, it's going to be one or the other. He's come out and said it's either going to be Stützle or it's going to be Byfield.
Okay, but Byfield shouldn't play in the NHL right away. That's the difference.
Yeah, well, I don't think Stützle should play in the NHL.
No, but he's going to. Like, if he goes, either team is going to put him in.
I wish a lot of luck to whichever team tries that. I really do.
But they're not playing till December, right? So I could see either the Kings or the Sens putting him in right away because they're not playing till December now in Germany. So
Russ, hold the phone. Are you actually under the impression that the NHL is going to get started by December?
No, January.
Okay.
Yeah, I think January is doable. If I were the NHL, I would be like, okay, we'll build off the momentum of the World Junior Hockey Championships, and I would just start my season right as that ends.
Wait, you mean you hope the World Junior Championships happen, right? That's a hope.
No, they confirmed it. It's going down in Edmonton.
I mean, they say it's going to happen in a bubble. Like, you got to make. I don't know if that. Things could happen. Okay. Let's just say that.
If I can't be in a rink by December, I am actually going to step down because I will have taken my own life. Like, it's we'll have a vacancy at editor-in-chief because I cannot go another 3, 4, 5 months without drinking that stale coffee, without hearing that audible electrical humming.
But let's see what their bubble looks like before we think that it's going to be guaranteed first. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of issues there with that World Junior.
But Russ, did you not see the video that Jason Kenney put out? The Rockies are right outside of Edmonton. They're right there. And that's where I'm going to set up shop personally.
Okay.
So Mitch, we're pretty like.
No, I want to get Mitch into this conversation.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on this?
can I even have an opinion on this? Like, this is just a mess. I mean, we're looking at the Q is coming back tonight, and there's great uncertainty that they're even going to last a month at this point. And we look at the other junior leagues as well. And I think the WHL and the OHL are both looking at December starts. And logistically, who really knows what's going to happen with the American teams and so on. I'm not particularly optimistic. And with regards for who's going to play, I think Rossi could probably step in and play, especially with the added time. I wouldn't be surprised to see someone like Stützle or Byfield get put in the position, but whether or not they're actually going to be effective, like I think the long play here with Byfield is to let him play a full season elsewhere where he can work on his game in space. Yep. And he can work on his ability to improve the way that he uses his body to separate and get himself into a more NHL ready position. You don't want these guys losing their confidence before they even have the opportunity to step up and score big.
And as somebody who covers the Montreal Canadiens, you know all about players losing their confidence for getting into the game too early.
I think that's important too. Just everybody seems to have this rush to the NHL mentality if you're like a top 5 pick. And I don't think that's always the best way to go. Like, for example, I think Jack Hughes would have benefited greatly from a year in college, just from a physical development standpoint, allow him to kind of get his legs under him and kind of get his man strength. It's hard too, because I find myself comparing him in particular to his brother and how much, physical development, Quinn was able to make in that first year after his draft. And, obviously, I don't know if you've seen any of the videos, but Jack has done the same. So I feel like, there's a lot of, I don't want to say there's a lot, it's all among the fans. I don't think it's among the staff or anything like that, but a lot of fans are concerned that maybe Jack wasn't the best pick. And I think that he will come out and, show that, but I wish that he had been able to, start his NHL career with that kind of physical development behind him instead of having a subpar, especially for him and his standards, freshman or rookie season, I should say, instead of a freshman season in college.
I mean, Tampa fans said that for a couple of years on Victor Hedman. They were like, oh my God, this is a terrible pick. And now Victor Hedman's the Conn Smythe winner. Like, it's been said, even Quinn Hughes, there were starting to be some whispers early on, like, is he really what we say he's going to be or think he's going to be? So yeah, Jack will be fine, but you're right. Unfortunately, when a guy goes first overall, it's almost like he's forced into playing in the NHL, whether he's ready or not.
Yeah. And then I feel the same as for all the top 5. Like, they if they're not in the NHL in 2 years, like, people think there's a big problem there, and that's not fair. It's really not fair. Anywho, we should move on before I go off on a tangent. So we wanted to go team by team. Obviously, we can start with New York. First overall pick is kind of a given, but there are some options later on in the draft for them as well. Any thoughts on who might be available and who they might be interested in?
So I kind of want the New York Rangers to go like Leroy Jenkins to evoke a meme from the late aughts. Like, I want them with their first overall pick. They have a desperate need at center. I need them to go for Quinton Byfield, not just for content reasons. I think that might even be the best long-term play. Like, you get that franchise center that they are so direly in need of. And they've proven last year that they can capably contend without that sort of player already in their lineup. Like, they have time to wait for him to develop. That to me would be a really compelling angle. Of course, I think they're going to go with Alexis Lafreniere, and that's totally reasonable in its own right. Secondly, though, when it comes to that second first round pick, this is where the fun really happens. I want them to like swing on a Maverick Bork, swing on like a Noel Gunler, swing on like a Hendrix Lapierre, just to upset David too. I mean, that to me is fertile ground right there. I mean, you have such a wealth of prospects if you're the New York Rangers that you can just place all these 1 in a million bets. And if they don't hit, then you're not going to be that much worse off for it, because Jeff Gorton, what a job he has done. I mean, like, he put out that letter 2 years ago, and now they have one of the best prospect pools in the NHL, and that's before accounting for Alexis Lafreniere. So, hey, throw caution to the wind and just have fun with it. No stats, just vibes here.
I can tell you, they're definitely going to go with Lafreniere because at some point when they need to sell tickets, he's the most marketable guy too. And the Rangers tickets have been sagging for what they used to be. They used to be a sellout all the time. They're no longer. Now they're one of the higher ticket prices too, but that's going to factor into it. So they're going to go with Lafreniere. Now that second pick though, I kind of think Gordy's going to go with the Western Canadian guy. I think Connor Zary could be a guy. And I think that's a guy who I think we all know he needs to work on his skating, but he could take all the time in the world for that. He's got a lot of other abilities. I like the way he gets in position to shoot. He's got a great shot. He passes well. I think at times he could drive play. But again, I think Lapierre could be another one where they can take a chance on a player like that because, yeah, he had his season cut short. There is a lot of ability there. If there's some extra time that he has to take, that's not a big deal for them. And a lot of things did change. Even with Kravtsov now over in the KHL, there was going to be an initial push like, hey, we've got to get him in the NHL right away. But now Lafreniere is going to correct that situation too, because my reports that I get from the KHL is, hey, he still needs to mature as like a young man. So let him stay over there. He's scoring goals. He'll be happy. There's still going to be a transition when he comes back to North America too. So you're right. The Rangers can really be really patient here with whoever they pick with that second pick.
Mitch, what are you thinking?
I just question whether the guys that you kind of have on the table there, JD, are going to be an option at that point.
Well, that's why I had to put so many out there. Because if I just put out Gunler, if I just put out Lapierre, if I just put out, Jeremy Poirier, it's like, that's playing with fire. But if I put out all of these names, then it's guaranteed that at least one of them will be available. It stands to reason that at least one of those names will be there for them, assuming things don't go completely haywire. So that's what I'm thinking there, hopefully. And I mean, like, let's say they do take Lafreniere in that spot, right? Then they still have that glaring need for a franchise center. Well, you can take that swing with Lapierre, and you kind of have to at that point. If not him, maybe a Brendan Brisson is available, maybe Maverick Bourque. I mean, I would prefer either of those two players to Lapierre personally, but I understand the argument to the contrary. They're going to have options, and I think
some of those guys are gone by then, though. I do, and I do think Gunler will be gone before then too.
I think Bourque might be there. Bourque
could be.
NHL scouts hate Bourque for some reason. It's truly bizarre. Like the Jan Misak thing at the beginning of the year, every time I'd bring him up to a scout, they'd be like, what do you mean in the fourth round, the third round? And I'd be like, oh, geez, that's kind of harsh. And now I've kind of seen the light a little bit. Maverick Bourque, I feel like they're gaslighting me. Like you watch this kid play and his playmaking ability is top notch. And I feel like this is where I cede the ground to Mitch, who can evangelize on Bourque's behalf for like a half hour if we let him.
Yeah, this is a dangerous game. I mean, he's pretty much everything that you want other than like the high motor type player, but it's hard to play 22 minutes when you're 17 on what essentially was a middling team, and he carried them all the way. It's really, really tough for me to understand why teams are so low on him, but I do understand there is a little bit of risk there because the motor thing and the skating, they're both lacking the proof of concept a little bit. And I think if you can work on those, you give them lots of time, you have a proven track record of development. I personally don't think he's going to go top 20, but when the draft's all said and done, he's probably a top 15 player in the class.
Now, Mitch, I want to ask you about another guy who played his draft year very young, and that's in Quinton Byfield. Now, I've already read your draft list, so I know the answer to the question, but for those that didn't check out your draft list, how would you rate number 1 and number 2? And then my second question is, how would you rate them, all things being equal? Like if Quinton was a year older than he is now, or if Lafreniere was a year younger than he is now, to make the age difference a little bit more equal.
So I had Lafreniere number 1 and Byfield number 2. I think there's a pretty distinct difference between the two of them myself. A good argument in Lafreniere's favor is if you error adjust for the production, because goals in the OHL went up by 0.9 this season, or 0.8, which is insane. It just shows the quality of offensive talent and the lack of goaltending talent in the league. And so if you put everyone on equal footing in terms of scoring, Lafreniere was still the more impressive goal scorer and point getter in his D-1 than Byfield was in his D year. And so positional value aside, I also think there's just a little bit more certainty with, you're going to get a top 15 minimum forward in the NHL with Lafreniere. Whereas with Byfield, he could end up being just a very good second line center. Obviously, that carries a ton of value. And if you look back on the draft, getting that player at second overall is certainly not a bad pick, especially one who brings such a unique package of skills.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then let's move on to LA. We all know and love their prospect pool and what they have in there available to them in the next couple of years, which is why we've all speculated about the possibility of them doing something, off the board. Obviously, a lot of people are thinking it's going to be Stützle or Byfield, but could it be somebody like Askarov? Could it be a defenseman? We're all looking at forwards, but they got the prospect pool. They don't really need forwards. They could really be a wild card.
I mean, I don't know if they really need anything. I mean, the depth of their pool is just so outstanding. It's absurd. They've got 6 legitimate center prospects, and most of them are of the high end variety. Now, in terms of what I'm hearing, I've heard from some sources that they believe the Kings are exploring the opportunity of taking Jamie Drysdale at number 2 overall. And that's sort of some of the industry scuttlebutt that's making its way around. Now, contrary to that, some of the people more closely connected to the Kings front office, I think Mayor's Manor and the Fourth Period or whatever, they've gone out of their way to make sure that these rumors are squashed, right? So how do you make sense of that? I'm not necessarily sure. If I was a betting man, I'd probably lean towards the Kings taking Stützle. I think that the one quality, if you were to kind of nitpick with their prospect pool, is there's nobody who has that kind of game-breaking ceiling, right? Like Alex Turcotte can be a really mid-range kind of first-line center. You can kind of get something similar out of, I don't know, Gabriel Velarde if his back holds up, right? But they don't have that dynamic player who can just take over a shift, take over a game. And for all of the legion of flaws that we have observed with Tim Stützle's game, a lot of them are developmental flaws, things that can be corrected with a thorough development regimen. And there's no denying his ceiling. I don't think anyone among us has any concerns about whether he has it in him, the capability to be that kind of dynamic player. It's just how is he going to overcome these obstacles en route to that? And I think that sort of quality is going to lend itself well to being taken by the Kings at number 2 overall.
One thing I could tell you with a long conversation that I had with Stützle a few months ago is he worked on his skating to the point where he pinpointed he likes to lose defenders, but he felt like in the NHL that might be a problem. So he worked on his turns because he knows that he can start and stop quickly, but the turns would be a key thing to getting some space and losing defenders. And he feels like he has corrected that part of his game now. So that would definitely help him a lot. Now, I don't think if he were to play in the NHL, he could play center right away. No. So that's not going to happen. And I don't think the Kings have to be locked into, hey, all those guys are centers. I think they could put Velarde on the wing. It's not like they're locked into that. Me personally, I would go for the center because I do think because that's Byfield's natural position, he could be there for a very long time. I would go with that. But I have heard that they're sort of split. I have heard from a couple people that they're split. I haven't heard Drysdale, but I heard they're split between, Byfield and Stützle. And that's why I think on draft day, I think they're going to be battling it out until the very last minute. I do. At the draft table, the virtual draft table.
Yes, of course. Mitch, what are your thoughts on this one?
I wonder how much of this is just like a chess match between Ottawa, because they got 3 and 5, and Detroit at number 4, LA at number 2. I'm very pro Byfield at 2, obviously. But if you're the Senators at number 3, even though Stützle is not the player that I want there, I mean, he's going to put fans in the seats. There's you just watch that highlight reel, and he's going to pull off some crazy stuff in the NHL. He's going to electrify the Senators fan base. And so if you're picking him, if you're the Ottawa Senators, you want to pick him. He's going to increase ticket sales. He's that kind of player. And if it takes a year or two, whatever, but long term, even if he's only a 60, 70 point guy, he is going to be magical for the highlight reel. And I think the Los Angeles Kings certainly have to know a little bit of what Ottawa is trying to do. And I think Detroit might be in a very interesting position as well. There's a little bit of misdirection you see come out every year in the draft. Sometimes it's not actually the case. Like we heard about the Doc going to Chicago thing the day before, and everyone was like, oh, they're just trying to put the pressure on teams. And then they did it. But we have had other examples with teams picking later in the top 10 who have, sort of alluded to, hey, we're picking this guy. And then a team has to step up and take their guy. We saw that in the Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Barrett Hayden draft as well. And part of me, maybe I'm just being over optimistic. I really want to see Byfield go number 2, but maybe that's what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I would go.
Yeah.
All excellent thoughts, guys. And Russ, I know you got to go because you got to go do more media stuff. So thanks for joining us.
Yep. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, guys.
Sharing your insight. We'll see you on draft day.
Okay. See you then.
So in talking about the we kind of started talking a little bit about the Senators and what they were going to do. And they're another team that I think could just throw in a wild card. I actually think this is going to be like the most interesting draft in quite a few years, just in terms of the volatility of what could happen and how dominoes could fall and opportunities that opens up for later picks in the draft. But I also think it's interesting because we talked a little bit about how like Ottawa needs to pick a guy that's going to be a big piece of their future core. So for you guys, who do they need to pick versus who could they roll the dice on with maybe the 5th pick?
So I think they desperately need Quinton Byfield. Like, I think that they need...
What if they don't have that? What if it's not an option, though?
If it's not an option, though, then I think that they have to go with Lucas Raymond, right? Because I would take Lucas Raymond in a heartbeat ahead of Tim Stützle, like without even a moment's hesitation. If that's the choice that they're faced with, I mean, Lucas Raymond, he's a better playmaker than Tim Stützle. He's a better finisher than Tim Stützle. He has better offensive habits than Tim Stützle. I really think that everyone is sleeping a great deal, like very comfortably, in the most interlocked slumber of their life. Like they just do not appreciate the genius of this kid. And it's because he was playing 7 minutes a night with every NHL washout on Frölunda's 4th line. And if you put him in the situation that, for example, let's look at Alexander Holtz. Like, even if you gave Raymond those minutes, how much more would he have produced? And Holtz didn't get exactly plumb offensive assignments either. So it's not exactly like either of them was feasting on opportunities at the SHL level. And lo and behold, now that Raymond is getting an opportunity, he is playing further up the lineup for Frölunda. The points are coming, and we're seeing the highlight reel maneuvers. Like the clip that was on Twitter this morning, I wish I could remember who put it out there so I would give him credit right now, but it was like, this is amazing. Look at him handling through his stride. Look at the way that his forearms and his shoulders aren't anchored to his core. Like, these are great puck handling habits. Look at the way that he baits the defenseman to the strong side only to distribute to the weak, and just complete a highly technically difficult pass to a trailer that he didn't even look at. Like, this kid has so many skills available to him that are going to translate exceptionally well to the NHL. And I think, like, we talk about, is Stützle ready this year? No, I don't think anybody other than potentially Rossi and Lafreniere are ready for NHL action this year. But next year, I think that Lucas Raymond's going to be at the top of the list of players who can contribute immediately to an NHL lineup. And if you're the Ottawa Senators, you still need that game-breaking talent in your forward ranks. He's the guy. He is the player for that. And if you compare him with a Brady Tkachuk, like, what a terrifying twosome on that front line. I mean, you've got the one guy who, in spite of having the visage of an infant, is just like out there bodying people left and right. And then you have the overwhelming skill of Lucas Raymond. I mean, that's too much to contend with. I wonder where Mitch is going to go. I think he might feel the same way about Raymond, but perhaps he's got another name to throw into the hat.
If Byfield's gone, I think the best player available is definitely Raymond. I don't know if it's the best pick for the Senators, but that's neither here nor there. But at number 5, I would love to see them reunite Raymond and Holtz together. Those two are so dynamic together. I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're taking a defenseman with one of those 2 picks. But like, the magic that those two have when they share the ice together is truly exceptional. It goes back years. I mean, they're just so entertaining. You have two dual threat attackers who both think the game quite similarly. Alexander Holtz continues to improve as a playmaker. He continues to get more driven to play on the inside. They're both very strong, committing players down low who will win battles, bring the puck inside, and set up the other one. I would love to see that continue on. We need another good chemistry story like that in the NHL.
Can I co-sign?
Well, I agree. Their chemistry is, yeah, exactly. Their chemistry is really, really good. But I think it's also from a benefit of being able to have played on national teams together for so long. It's kind of like the whole, Jack and Cole connection and all that stuff as well. But I am a huge Lucas Raymond fan. And I think the one thing that was really missing from his game, I don't want to say that it was even his shot, like the actual skill, but more the confidence that he had in his shot. Because last year he was always looking for the pass, and I feel that kind of comes with inherently being noted as the playmaker. Like, you're the playmaker, get him the puck kind of thing. And I think he saw that this past year, in the sense that he saw his ability as a playmaker and had confidence in that, but knew that he needed to be able to contribute more. And he just didn't believe in his shot. So he was always passing, even if the pass wasn't the best option, and the best option was to shoot. So I know that was a big point of emphasis for him in his off-season training. And I think that's another thing that we're seeing in the start of the points and all the moves that he's making. He's just way more comfortable in his shot, which is why it allows their coach to put him out there, especially like on the power play. But at the same time, having talked to both of them early in the summer, that was his plan all along. Like, last year was a learning curve development year. He wanted to kind of give him sheltered minutes and protect his confidence in that sense. Kind of like what we were talking about with NHL, like guys going to the NHL right away. Wanted to give him the opportunity to make mistakes and have that be okay, and work through them. And this year, the plan was for him to take that step forward and help him to become a better player. So, I mean, I love Byfield as well. Don't get me wrong, but I could totally make a case for taking Lucas Raymond second.
I mean, like, Christopher would have a lot of time for that, for sure. I mean, he's been always our European scout. He's been all year just saying that Lucas Raymond is right up there with Lafreniere and Byfield in that first tier of players. I don't know. I think that, like, I would prefer Byfield for the Senators probably, but I don't think it's outlandish to hold Lucas Raymond in that esteem at all. Not one bit. Especially in a world where Stützle is being mocked like top 1 and 2 and eventually 0th overall at this rate, the way that he's rising. Like, it's in a world where that's happening, I think that Raymond at 2 is totally reasonable.
Well, let's talk about the back half of the first round for the Senators, who, I know there's lots of options and you don't know who's available, but in your ideal world, who would you like to see them pick up there? We'll start with Mitch. I feel like a teacher when I say that. Like, I'm calling you out. Mitch, it's your turn.
They're kind of in an interesting position, right? Because they have historically taken the guy that they really like. Like, they took Jacob Bernard-Docker late in the first, and I think the early returns were he was going to live up to his draft status. And then this past season, he kind of took a step back. But I think that largely comes from UND style. But we can move past that. The other guy who's interesting is last season they took Shane Pinto at 32 ahead of all these high skill guys. And the internet was outraged. And then now we look back on it and it's like, that was actually pretty smart. That was actually a pretty good pick. And so I wonder if they're just going to take whoever they feel. Like, they don't really seem to have this strong sense of maximizing value, at least relative to my standards. They're going to pick who they believe in. And I don't feel like there's going to be a strong push to pick positionally either. I think they're just going to take the player, whether they're a forward, a wing, center, defenseman, whatever. They're going to pick whoever they want to.
Yeah, I mean, the proof of concept is there, right? Like, Man, I'm with you on the Shane Pinto moment. I remember Sens fans and Sens writers, they were texting me, they were messaging me being like, JD, what is happening? I am apoplectic. And just being like, did you watch Shane Pinto? He was pretty good in the USHL last year, and I think that he projects pretty nicely to a middle six center role. And I would take him ahead of Kaliev if I were on an NHL draft floor too. And you know what? A year later, that looks really damn good. Now, in terms of who they're going to take, we always have to factor in the Eugene Melnick factor, which means he's going to look for players without a transfer fee. No, all jokes aside, I think that the Senators can go in a bunch of different directions here.
Jokes, JD.
Yeah, I'm feeling it today. I mean, like if you're the Sens and you're sitting there at 28th overall, I mean, there's always that one player that falls out of the top 10 or top 20, right? Like there was Tolman in that one year, although that fall is looking almost a little bit, I don't know, like a righteous omen, if you will. But I mean, what if, for example, and I'm just going to keep bringing him up because the NHL, every time I talk to somebody, is just so low on this kid, but Maverick Bourque would be a nice option there. John Jason Peterka, I think, would fit really well with what they've got going on in their forward group. Whether he's available or not is another story entirely, but certainly I could see him being somebody that they would covet. They need to get more reinforcements on the back end, and perhaps that kind of lends itself towards a pick of maybe a Ryan O'Rourke, maybe if Braden Schneider falls, although I don't find that to be an especially likely proposition, or they could just go like full on kamikaze, follow the precedent they set with Thomas Chabot and go in on Jeremy Poirier. Like, why not? I mean, he could still be there, and he's probably like a top 5 playmaker in this draft, regardless of position. Like, you put the puck on his stick in the offensive zone, and magic happens. And then you take him out of that third of the ice, and it is like some of the worst stuff you've ever seen. But that is the Jeremy Poirier conundrum. And if a team with a strong development staff and patience can kind of take all these NHL abilities and mold them into one coherent package, like Jeremy Poirier could be like a 50 to 60 point blue liner. And if you can get a player with that sort of potential at the end of the first round, sign me up. I'm all in.
Yeah. Well, let's talk.
Okay. Lay it on me, Rob. Okay, so we just had producer Rob chime in case you're wondering why we all went silent for a second there. He's shy, so he didn't put his mic on, and he put out a question from one of our listeners saying, what if Ottawa gets Byfield and Lucas Raymond? Well, that changes everything. I mean, then you've got the future of your first line right there. What was the back half of that question again? Do you remember, Julie?
No, I thought that was it.
That was it. Okay. I mean, yeah, there you go. You've got your future first line. You're set. I
also kind of think that that's a little bit of a fantasy land scenario.
I don't know if it's fantasy land. I think it's like a fantasy outcome, but I think it's a fantasy outcome that can occupy reality, because if Stützle goes, because if Stützle goes at second, it's totally doable, especially because the intel out of Detroit is that they're looking at Perfetti and Askarov. And if that happens, I mean, there we go. We've got the scenario. It can be done. We have the technology, as it were. And I think that opens you up to just like have Pierre Dorion sitting at his virtual table. I mean, we all remember the NFL draft and Bill Belichick just feeding his dog treats because it's going so well. We're going to have a new version of that for the NHL, and it's going to be Pierre Dorion with a pair of like aviators on and a cigar dangling from his mouth, because he knows that he's just built the first line that can take his team to a very long spot in the playoffs. I don't want to say the Stanley Cup. It takes a lot to get there, but this is a group, this is a nucleus that can take you places in the playoffs.
I think it would be great. Go ahead, Mitch. You chime in.
I think if that scenario happens, it then opens you up to take the big swing late in the first, especially on a defenseman. Like, you have Lassie Thompson, you have JBD, you have Tychonik, who they haven't moved any needles, and if they have, it's been the wrong way since draft day. And so now you've put yourself in a position where you can take another defenseman and see what happens. You know, Poirier is obviously a great example, as JD outlined, but Ryan O'Rourke is a very attractive option defensively, especially in that position. Like, I can't imagine a scenario in which he's not in the NHL. But what if you just go super, like you just go off the board? You take like Topi Niemela, who since the return to play has looked like a new player. He's just activating off the point constantly, way, way more involved than previously. Or what about William Wallinder, who has been a very controversial player, but the Ottawa Senators are certainly not shy of taking players who have questions abounding about their hockey IQ. And if you can mold him into something, you could get a top 4 defenseman who has a ton of flash late in the first. And that's a very high upside bet.
We talked earlier about how some teams need to take the safe pick. And I feel if the Senators are able to get both of those players, safe is totally checked off and they can do whatever the heck they want with the rest of their draft. Because nobody's really going to be paying attention to it because they're going to be, oh my gosh, I can't believe they got both of these guys. So I feel if that were to happen, A, it would be amazing. B, it allows them to do other things in the draft because I feel like even if you went home with those 2 guys and nothing else, they would be so happy. So I just think it opens doors. But JD, you also mentioned the wild card in Detroit. And last year, now I was a huge Moritz Seider fan. I was 100% confident after watching him at the World Championships that he would be picked in the top 10. And even at the World Championships, scouts were telling me I was crazy. And I'm like, nope, I'm sticking to it. It's totally going to happen. And, Stevie Y came through for me and making it happen. So that leads me to believe that he could do something crazy at 4, which to me, I can't say this. To me, it wouldn't be a surprise if Askarov is gone in the top 5. To a lot of other people, it would be shocking. And I actually got into a really interesting debate with some fans on Twitter and Facebook about taking goalies in the first round. And they're like, hey, you can get good goalies, late in the draft, like Connor Hellebuck. And I said, okay, first of all, let's take Connor Hellebuck's draft year. He was like a 2.5 goals against in the North American Hockey League. He had no medals, wasn't playing on any international teams, and had no personal accolades. And you want to compare that to what Askarov has done at mostly 17? And then everybody wants to be like, oh, we're World Juniors. I'm like, okay, but he was 17. Like, what are you thinking to say that is the standard that we should judge him on and throw everything else out that he's done well? But then at the same time, he is so incredibly confident that I don't know if I am turned off by it and it's too much and I don't want a guy like that on my team, or if I love it so much that I want a guy with that much confidence in himself, especially when he has the capability to back it up on the ice. And so I feel like him going to World Juniors and having a disappointing tournament, not only for, himself, or not only for Russia, but for himself, personally, he did not play in any way remotely well. And I feel that that was a big slice of humble pie that is going to serve him well. And I think we're seeing that even now because it forced him to look at his game and see that that there were flaws, that there are areas to improve above and beyond what any, kid at 17 would say, oh, I still need to improve. But it forced him to get specific with it. And I think we're seeing that in what he's been able to do now at the start of the KHL and the MHL season, or the VHL season. And so I just think that any team who passes on Askarov is going to be kicking themselves. And there are going to be teams behind him that didn't get to draft him that are going to be irritated that they didn't have the chance to draft him. So it's one of those things where if you don't pick him, the team behind you is going to, and they're going to win a lot of Stanley Cups. That's my rant on Askarov and why I think he's deserving of not only a first round pick, but in my opinion, a guaranteed top 10 pick.
So I have 2 goalie performances that have been burned into my brain this year as just unforgettable, insane performances that I don't think anyone could ever replicate. And Mitch was there for one of them. That was Devin Levi at the World Junior A Challenge against the USA. That was, I think that might be tops. I think that might be tops when you consider the team quality. But right next to it, that would have to be probably Yaroslav Askarov at the Hlinka Gretzky. That final salvo, that last step into the breach by Team Canada. I mean, they got a scoring chance every other second in that final 30 seconds of the game. And like the frustration on those players' faces, like you're talking about Quinton Byfield, Cole Perfetti, Seth Jarvis, and depending on your mileage, whether this matters or not, Ridley Gregg too. Sure, why not? He's a first rounder all of a sudden. They were all getting just stoned by Yaroslav Askarov. Now, the one thing I will say on the behalf of some of the 200 hockey men that I've spoken to as it relates to Askarov is that they aren't necessarily writing him off because of the World Junior performance. It helped kind of put a spotlight on some of the concerns that they might have held previously, but it wasn't like a death knell to his draft stock. Mm-hmm. The one thing I did hear, though, was the fact that he followed it up with a very poor performance at the Five Nations started to raise some alarm bells. Now, whether that's fair or not, I don't. Who can say? I don't know if I would take him in the top 5 just because I think the caliber of forward that you can get in that spot, or even defenseman, depending on your mileage, you can get somebody really special, a top of the lineup player, and those are much harder to find relative to a goaltender, for example. Like you can get somebody in Joel Blomqvist, who I don't think is that far removed from Askarov. Like Askarov is the best goalie prospect since Carey Price. Full stop. But like Joel Blomqvist, like there's a point with goaltenders where there's diminishing returns, right? Like you look at the leaderboard, on save percentage, on goals saved above average, and the year-over-year variance is one thing that sticks out. The other thing is just how little room separates the best goalies from the just above average goalies, right? And like how much stock are you willing to invest to get that kind of difference? It's an interesting question, and I'm really kind of curious to see how the NHL answers it. Like you said, Steve Yzerman proved last year that he's willing to kind of take a swing for the fences based on his guy, whoever he wants. And for that reason alone, we can't rule out Askarov at 4th overall. Never mind the intel we have that is kind of helping fuel this speculation. I think that would be a bit of a stretch for me, a bit rich for my blood personally. But I think the goalie guild would push back on that one in a big way. What do you think, Mitch, about Askarov at 4?
No, that those are my thoughts. I fully.
Who would you take if you were Detroit? Who would you take? I'm not saying you should be at 4. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of people would be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised.
I would be looking at one of the forwards. I think if you're the Detroit Red Wings, the two top OHL forwards after Byfield, Rossi, and Perfetti are probably a really, really good option. Perfetti just screams Detroit Red Wing through a style of play. Like, I know he's not the most pacey guy, but he's going to outsmart you at every corner, and he's going to make you look silly. Like, this guy, I know people are concerned about his skating, but he's going to do the exact same things in the NHL. He's just so intelligent. He's so adaptable. He's so manipulative that it's really tough to imagine a situation where he's not a great player. I look at Nick Suzuki as a parallel. He's Nick Suzuki, but better. And Nick Suzuki stepped into the NHL and was very good, despite prevailing concerns of his pace, skating. Perfetti's a better shooter, better playmaker. He's going to have no problem adjusting, and he might not be that far away from the NHL either.
All right, we're going to be here all night if we go through every team. So we're going to try to speed this up a little bit. But one team that I think gets overlooked in this top 10 really is Anaheim. And they have a lot of needs in their prospect pool. So who do you think they should target? And who do you think, obviously anybody could be available given what we just talked about. But who do you think should be on their short list?
Yeah, and I think this kind of, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. We got a question here from Oblivion J. That's a hell of a name with 2 A's, two. And he asks, do the Ducks pass on a forward like Holtz or Rossi? Because we need forwards badly. You know what? I just love the idea of Alexander Holtz on Trevor Zegras' flank. Trevor Zegras, by the way, anybody who's listening, was the #1 affiliated prospect according to the Elite Prospects affiliated prospect rankings. Let's see how many times I can squeeze prospect into one sentence. So I think that Alexander Holtz with Zegras is just like, it's what we deserve. It is like the only way I can imagine us being rewarded for the hell year that is 2020 as hockey fans, beyond reuniting Raymond and Holtz themselves, right? Like there's Plan A, which is Raymond and Holtz go to Ottawa. Plan B is Holtz gets to line up next to Zegras. And if he is available, that's where I'm going, because the Ducks, they've got some nice defensive prospects. They've got some nice forward prospects as well, but a lot of them project as more middle of the lineup pieces. And the thing about the Ducks too is they don't need to draft in the top 10 to get top 4 defensemen. Let's not be silly. We know that they do their best work from rounds like 2 onwards. So let's just let them pick in the top 10, grab a forward that fits their immediate needs and can kind of form that first line with maybe Comtois and Zegras. That would be a hell of a lot of fun going forward. And then they can focus on everything else afterward. I don't know, maybe Mitch, you've got somebody else you want to throw into the ring, but I'm going to have a hard time hearing arguments to the contrary for Holtz and Zegras. Has not connected when you're into it. I think as far as their second pick, I mean, like William Vollinder might be available in that spot. That would be interesting, especially given that we know the Ducks can develop defensemen. I think that the only real problem there is if they develop Vollinder, there's another expansion draft on the way. Are they going to have to give him up because they sign the current NHL version of Tyler Kleven to a no move? We will have to wait and see. But getting that player in the first place and then worrying about that after the fact, that's the direction I would go in.
All right, well, another team that has quite a few picks in the first round is the New Jersey Devils. In talking to Devils fans, they seem to think they are going to have the pick of the litter. And I have to keep reminding them, if all the forwards go, there's only one left. And do you want that one? Or what we haven't talked about are the defensemen. So I am long on record that Jake Sanderson and defensemen like him do not grow on trees. And it's my opinion that if you pass on him, he will make you regret that decision. So for me, I would take Jake Sanderson here for the Devils. And I would take him even if Drysdale is still on the board. I'm getting faces.
I know it's bold. It's not outlandish though. Like I think everybody who is poo-pooing Jake Sanderson in the top 10 hasn't watched him play. And Mitch can back me up on the poll that we did for our draft guide. By the draft guide, we basically called it the Jake Sanderson poll, because everything in his game is at a high level, if not like an elite level. Rush defense, he's one of the best, if not the best. Transition, Mitch, weren't you saying he was the best defender you've tracked in 4+ years of doing this?
Yeah, draft eligible, not even close.
Yeah, that's insane. Like, how often is that type of player available at 7th or 5th or 6th or whatever? Not often. He's physical. I think his offensive instincts are underrated. I think he's a bit deferential as presently constructed, and that's something that he'll need to work on. But I mean, there's no reason, like technically he can fire the puck. He sees the ice well, and he started to activate a little bit more off the point as the season wore on. Like you started to see the confidence creep in. And what you really want to see from these players in their draft year is development. And that's why, for example, we were so high on Alexander Holtz, was he just kept improving. Well, Jake Sanderson, every time I turned on the tape, every time I got a chance to see this kid, he was better than the last viewing. And that to me is a great sign. And frankly, I know Devils fans, they've been making jokes about this. They've been taking pot shots at Sanderson and pot shots at draft eligible prospect. That is beyond the pale. I would never do that. But in this case, it's not warranted, because Jake Sanderson is absolutely going to live up to the billing if they take him in that spot.
Well, you're right. Devils fans would riot if they take Sanderson, because they're like, no, we want a forward. And I'm like, why? What do you think, Mitch? What defenseman would you take first?
I would still take Drysdale first, but I do wonder if they'll even have an opportunity to pick Sanderson. I'm pretty convinced that Sanderson's going at 5th to Ottawa. Like I I don't see a scenario in which they have the option to pick him, provided things really, really work out in Ottawa's favor.
No transfer fees. Just putting that out there. No transfer fees for Sanderson. They're at 5.
Well, hey, I no complaints from me on that one. I think he's tremendous. I mean, I went over to Sweden last November for the Five Nations tournament for the U18s and had a really great conversation with him. We actually put the feature out on EP Rinkside in January, late January, I think it was. So you can check that out if you want to read it. But it's all about like his connection with his dad. Obviously, his dad played over 1,100 games in the NHL. Jeff Sanderson, most notably with the Edmonton Oilers, and he was a speed demon and a very proficient scorer and playmaker. And Jake is not any of those things. Just a totally different player in every respect, except for the skating. And I think that is what really makes Jake so valuable, is that he is a big body. He does use it. He is very smart. His hockey IQ is, again, another big strength of his game, in my opinion. And then when you take not only like the offensive part, because at this point in the draft, a lot of people focus on the offensive part of a defenseman's game, but how about the ability to actually defend? And Jake he does it so well, and he does it so well that you don't even notice it. And I think that's why he's really able to fly under the radar to, an untrained eye or an average viewer, because they don't see the subtleties in his game that have big impact that you don't even know, because he doesn't even let it get that far that you need to know it. You know what I mean?
Sorry, I accidentally muted myself there. You are absolutely preaching to the choir. We love Jake Sanderson's game. Joey Pedmanabon has been in his corner all year, and you know what? The more we kind of tracked back and looked into that, it proved prescient on young Joey's part, and I really think that I can't foresee a scenario where he makes it past 7. I mean, at the very latest. We actually have a question here.
Yeah, I agree.
And I'm going to answer this one.
I love how you sound so surprised every time that happens. You always sound so surprised when there's a question.
Well, I don't know. I'm always enthusiastic about user engagement, you see, and connecting with our audience. And this one, with a name like this, he warrants my enthusiasm. That guy, Bobski, asks, am I the only one who thinks Raymond is going to be a bust for where he is going to be drafted? You would be the only one in this conversation, my dude.
Yes.
With all due respect. I mean, here's the thing, a bust title just isn't going to work for Raymond, because he has the most complete game of any winger in this draft. So how is he going to be a bust? He's already halfway there. No, I'm not seeing it, buddy. Sorry.
Yeah.
Raymond, Mitch is just disgusted with it beyond belief.
Well, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about Buffalo. Obviously, some fun changes for them this offseason and everything that they've got going on. So what is GM Adams going to do?
Well, he's going to consult with all one of his scouts that are still on staff. And he's going to find that he's not exactly being drowned out by a chorus of voices, and then he's probably going to cite the Elite Prospects Draft Guide. And if he were to do that, it would probably lend itself to a pick. I think that Holtz is going to be in consideration. I think ultimately the pilot project for Kevin Adams is find a way to make Jack Eichel less miserable. And I think if you're trying to make Jack Eichel less miserable, the best way to do that is to get him a shooting talent like a Cole Perfetti, or perhaps somebody who can keep pace with him to a better degree, which would be Alexander Holtz. So I think that ultimately they're going to look for a finishing type player. I think that is the need in Buffalo. They thought that they were going to get that out of Jeff Skinner, and then they signed him to a contract that has, year one wasn't great in terms of the return on investment. now they get to draft that player. So we'll see what happens there. But I'm anticipating that they'll make a forward selection.
I'm going to go full chaos mode and say they take Jack Quinn here. They're going to be the top 10 Jack Quinn team.
I mean, like, the way that they handle 8th overall historically, like, sure. I mean, Middlestat was a bad pick the moment they made it. Ristolainen hasn't exactly panned out. Who else did that? Alexander Nylander. I mean, Jack Quinn would fit that mold, so why not? I'm here for it. And somebody has to jump on that top 10 landmine. And of course, when I say that, it's all relative, right? Like, Jack Quinn at 13 even starts to sound a whole lot more reasonable. Jack Quinn, where the Buffalo Sabres are picking, however, decidedly less so.
Well, here's my other question for you guys. We haven't really talked about Marty and where I don't even know that we really talked about him at all. So where do you see him ending up?
Marco Rossi? Sorry, you kind of broke up a tiny bit there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
Rossi.
Oh, that's a tough one. I haven't heard any real enthusiasm from any NHL teams about Rossi, strangely enough. Like, I've heard Ottawa wax poetic about Lucas Raymond. I've heard other teams go on about Perfetti. I've heard people go on about Askarov even, but you just haven't heard that same kind of affinity for Marco Rossi's game, which, strangely enough, makes no sense. Like, why do people not have time for his game? I mean, here's the comparison I keep arriving at. He outproduced Mitch Marner in his draft year in the same league. Of course, scoring went up, as Mitch rightly noted, but Mitch Marner was playing on the powerhouse London Knights. Now, granted, the Ottawa 67s were no slouch. I'm not trying to kind of say that in terms of contextualizing his output. But I mean, if you're telling me that Marco Rossi can provide a similar impact based on the comparison to Mitch Marner that they kind of have with their statistical profile and even their height-based profile, of course, why not use a high pick on him? Like, I could see him making sense just about anywhere from about 4th overall onward. In fact, like, if you want to talk about where I would have him going if I were running the NHL draft, and maybe I can get some hackers on board who can let this happen for me, just kind of sneak into the elite prospects budget there. But I think, like, Detroit should be the team that takes him if he's available at 4. I mean, that's assuming that Byfield and Raymond are gone, right? I think that is where it makes a lot of sense, certainly based on how our board shakes out. What about you, Mitch? Can you see a scenario where Buffalo ends up hopping on Marco Rossi, perhaps high upside play?
Yeah, sure. There's a good chance. I mean, he's a center. He can be the number 2 guy. He can fill that role, or you can put him on wing. He's got a ton of positional versatility, and that extends not just, whether he's taking the draw or not. It's how he plays the game. He's adaptable to any situation, to any scenario, and he's going to produce. But specifically for where he's going to end up, he's the biggest wild card for me, because I think he's the 4th best player in the draft class. But I think there's a very good chance that he's outside the top 10. And then after that, who picks him? Does Winnipeg just go for it? Nashville? Like, the Leafs are obviously going to be all over that, but I don't know if he makes it until 15. Carolina, maybe. To me, he's just the prime candidate to fall outside of that top 10 after Anton Lundell.
Well, that's the interesting part about guys who fall, right? It's one of those things where they fall so far that the teams that have them available never even considered they would be an option, and they're in a tailspin and don't know what to do, so they stick with what they've got, kind of thing. And that's how they just keep on falling, and that's when you end up with, like, Cole Caulfield at, what was he, 15 when he was picked?
Precisely too low. He was picked at number far too low. And Cole Caulfield, by the way, since we're talking about another affiliated prospect, number 2 in the elite prospects ranking. And if I give up any more, there's going to be no reason to subscribe. So that's all the goods I'm giving up on that one. And how many examples, though, do we have of teams passing up on a shorter player only to have that precise player light up the NHL for, like, the next decade plus? Truly staggering.
Well, for the sake of time, let's talk about who we think will round out the top 10. We've made it to 8. So who do we think is going to be those final 2 guys that get in? Mitch, I know you already said that Lundell's out.
I think we placed Drysdale yet? Because I think someone has to take him in here.
No, he's one that we talked about, but we didn't really find him a home.
Yeah, I think when with Drysdale, you're getting a possible number 2, super mobile. It all comes down to development. How much more assertiveness, how much more confidence can you unlock out of him? And I think I know we'd like to look at positional needs and everything, but he's a great fit for any team. Any team could use more defensemen, especially with his skill set. And so it doesn't matter if you're Minnesota or if you're Winnipeg. I think we've talked a lot about Winnipeg taking a defenseman. What if they get Drysdale available there, and then they're not stepping up to take a Schneider or a Gooley?
That would be interesting. And I think that ultimately, like, Winnipeg would be a super compelling team to move up because of that, right? Like, I think the quality of defensemen, I think where they sit is just too late for one of Sanderson or Drysdale in all likelihood, but just too early for a Gooley or a Schneider. And this is a team that needs to rebuild their blue line. Like, plain and simple. I am always team best player available, but when you lose half of your blue line because Winnipeg doesn't have an airport, Jacob Trouba wants to move to the States, or because Dustin Byfuglien just has injury issues, right? When you have that catastrophic a moment with your blue line, you have to make immediate changes, particularly if you are a team like Winnipeg that is trying to remain in the hunt, trying to remain in the thick of it. You need those reinforcements sooner than later. I just talked myself into them moving up for one of Sanderson or Drysdale, and I'm pretty cool with that.
It could happen. But I think that rounds out our top 10, because I think we already decided that Askarov's going in the top 10 at some point. Yes?
Maybe? Question mark? Askarov is total wild card. Like, I could see him going to Detroit at 4, and then I look at the rest of the top 10 and I go, who the hell else is going to take him, right? Like, it's not going to be Buffalo. They've got Ukko Pekka Luukkonen in the wings. It's not going to be Minnesota. They've got what's his name, Capo Kakinen in the wings. Like, I don't see any of these teams having a big enough need in net that they would take that leap. And with that in mind, I think that a lot of them have so many holes elsewhere in their roster that they can't afford to take that kind of reach anyway. So he's a real wild card in kind of the same way that Lundell is, right? Like, I could see Lundell going towards the end of the top 10, or I could see him close to 20. Either or.
Mitch, where do you weigh in? Who rounds out your top 10?
Yeah, I'm pretty much with JD on this one. Like, Askarov, it's such a tricky situation to figure out where he's going to go. I'm really at a complete loss. I'm quite certain that one of these teams is going to take a WHL defenseman too high, and Gooley and Schneider. Like, it's just a little bit too high, but if you really like the guy, you really like his upside, you really like the projection, you don't mess around. You pick who you want to pick. And if you end up taking Gooley at 10th or whatever, and he's a lower end number 4 defenseman, you can live with that. You can live with that.
Well, I think that's where we're going to end it, because Jill has decided that it's time to eat. So I think that's a really great conversation. I loved, chatting hockey with you guys, as always. And I think the best, aspect about the draft, we can make arguments for so many different things because anything can happen. There's so many different opinions. And then when you mix in the talent that we have this year available, that anything can happen. Like, there's so many options that I think even now, just like us, my cat's tail on the way, just like us, we're, debating and going back and forth. And, even with an extra 4 months, it's not like any NHL team has their draft board set in stone.
Nope. And there's always going to be that one wild card that makes things real interesting. So you're going to have to stay tuned, because we're going to have a lot of coverage as those events unfold.
Yeah, yes, we are. We are going to be obviously doing live coverage on Twitter of the draft this year. We are going to have a live stream just like this during all rounds of the draft. So during the first round on Tuesday night, and then through all the mid rounds on Wednesday morning. So be sure, if you are not already following us at Elite Prospects on Twitter, to do so. And we will see you on Tuesday.